Big moves today as the U.S. has an expulsion of Russian diplomats. In fact, there were 60 Russian diplomats being expelled, described as aggressive intelligence collectors. 48 are now at the Russian embassy, 12 at the UN. The Russian consulate, as mentioned, in Seattle, ordered closed due to the proximity to a submarine base and to Boeing, but there's no specific threat or activity at that facility. Individuals and their families have been given 7 days to leave the U.S., but the U.S. is not alone. Actually, 133 Russian diplomats have been expelled from 20 countries. And again, this is in response to the attack on British soil, the poisoning of that spy, the British spy, and his daughter. Let's bring in our panel, see where this goes from here. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief for the Weekly Standard. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist, and David Catanese, senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report. Steve, thoughts on today's action?
Well, look, I think it's a big deal. This is an impressive move. The fact that the United States did it in conjunction not only with our British allies, but with more than a dozen other countries, sends, I think, a pretty strong message to Russia that this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated, at least not tolerated for very long without repercussions. So I think it's a good move, full stop. I think it would be better, the president could enhance this move or strengthen it by saying something in his own voice. You know, just last week he was tweeting that we need better relations with Russia and that people who are calling for him to confront Vladimir Putin on these poisonings or on election meddling in the United States or calling on him not to congratulate Vladimir Putin for a sham election. The president pushed back on that and said that these are people who don't want good relations with with Russia, between the United States and Russia, and we're all better off if there are good relations with the United States and Russia. Well, I think it's pretty clear that Russia's no intention of behaving the way that a civilized country would behave, and the president ought to make it clearer still by saying something directly in his own voice.
The Kremlin's response, Molly, is this: we deeply regret the taken actions. We are to analyze the situation following the declared decisions by a number of countries to expel our diplomats. The main analysis will be done by our foreign ministry. After that, the president will see proposals for taking retaliatory steps. A final decision will be made by the head of state. We've said more than once, and we say once again, Russia has had nothing to do with this affair whatsoever. Naturally, as before, we will proceed from the principle of reciprocity. Kremlin spokesman.
Yeah, Russia made this decision to do this poisoning of a British citizen and his daughter, and they also made the decision to not really respond to the concerns of the world when they raised them. And so now you have this action with more than a dozen, almost 24 countries expelling diplomats, and it is a strong action. And as Steve says, it does send a message. It's very difficult when you're dealing with a nuclear power to do much more than send a message without risking nuclear conflict. But this is something that is so serious that more action really is needed. I understand this is the UK's situation, and we are in a supportive role, even if we expelled more diplomats than they did. But there are other actions that can be taken. Even, the intelligence community report last year said that, for instance, anti-fracking movements were something that the Russian government was funding and trying to affect U.S. policy. Doing something policy-wise that can really hurt Russia or hurt them economically might be a good way to ramp things up without risking nuclear war.
David.
Look, this alleviates some of the critics that, have pounded the Trump administration for not acting on Russia, for not being forceful enough. This is the toughest action the Trump administration has taken to date against Russia. But I think you've also seen in statements today out of the Senate, particularly from John McCain, that this is an opportunity to do more, that this is an opportunity to move forward with economic sanctions and really hit them hard. I also think it's going to be striking to watch what is Putin's next move. I already saw on social media today the Russian government putting out polls saying, how should we retaliate? Which consulate of the Americans should we close? And I know there was talk, even just last week after the president's call with Putin, that there was going to be maybe another meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. That probably puts a chill on that, I think, at least for the near term.
Yeah, Molly, I just want to point out these Fox News polls. The first one is the president's job approval, job performance. We have the latest poll up to 45% approve, disapprove at 52%. And there you can see the previous track there. And the second question, Russia's main goal in election meddling, chaos, doubt, U.S. democracy, sowing chaos, 57%, helped Trump win 21%, helped Clinton win 5%. As you look at these polls and how people are perceiving the actions of the president, based on what Steve said, the want for the president to vocalize it a little bit more, or a lot more than he is, about what's happening on Russia, the actions are different than the voice.
Right. I actually think this kind of shows how silly this entire narrative about the president not being strong against Russia. I mean, objectively speaking, he's been stronger than either of his two predecessors against Russian aggression. And it's not just with actions like today's, which came at the direction of the president. They're not separate from the president. They were his actions that he recommended taking, and the White House said that. It's also true that he's been really tough. I mean, even on the Iran deal, which is something that Russia really wants the U.S. to stay in. Actions in Syria, missile defense, any number of actions, the president has actually been quite tough. And this narrative that he's not been tough, I mean, yes, people might want rhetoric that's stronger, but actions count a lot in this matter.
I just want to play this one other soundbite. This is Kevin Corke asking the spokesman today about these actions and what they mean.
Does an attack on the soil of a valued ally rise to the level of an act of war? Is that the administration's policy here?
Well, we've been joined at the hip with UK on this matter, with the UK on this matter. We stand firmly with our ally. Again, I'll classify this action as both brazen and reckless, and I don't want to get ahead of anything the president may or may not announce or declare later on.
Where is the line, though, Steve, for an act of war against the country?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, and it's something that comes up in the context of our NATO alliances. Obviously, Raj Shah, I think for very understandable reasons, didn't want to answer that question directly, certainly not in the affirmative. That might present him some problems.